Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. My microphone's not working. Maybe. There
Easy
we go.
for you to say, Sean.
Light Beer, Dark Money.
Yeah,
Here we are.
that's her. We
I'm
are.
Sean.
We are Light Beer, Dark Money. That is Sean Noble. I am Chris Clements.
So it is Monday morning, Monday after the election.
And we thought we were the prognosticators, but like everyone else in America, we did not know.
We were wrong.
We were speaking of about 2 weeks ago.
So the last episode, that was the day after the election. I said early ballots that came in and were counted. Everything was going to start going Lake's way, Blake's way, the Republican way. Not so much. Lake is down even more now than she was when we were talking on Wednesday.
Yep.
And she is not going to win.
No, she's not going to win.
Katie Hobbs is going to be the next governor. There is...
and it looks like David Schweikert's going to go down, too.
Nope.
No, you don't think so?
He won last night.
You think? He did?
Yeah, he won.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't see that. Was that called?
Yeah.
For sure? Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
I called it. I called him.
You called him?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's great, because he has work to do now.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if we really want to talk about that, but he's been on the show, and he's a friend, and I love David, but he has work to do now.
Well,
he has a lot of work to do now, because there's no way that race should have been that close.
Well, let's back up a second. There's no way that any of these races should have been that close.
Exactly.
But we had
and the Wall Street Journal has a great lead editorial today on the independent vote and how it totally went the Democrats' way.
Yeah.
Completely.
Which is
in a way during the midterms that it hasn't gone before.
Well, and it
was unpredictable.
Yeah.
So I would.
Well, it actually was not completely unpredictable. The person who saw this was Rich Tao at Engages.
And we're going to have him back on.
Absolutely.
And we're going to have our good friend Simon
who
was calling this the whole time. We're like, what are you talking about?
And on Twitter, I said, I love your optimism. You're totally wrong. And I was totally wrong.
Yeah. You're right. We're wrong. We have to, eat crow on a lot of stuff.
So we've talked about where is Mark Kelly, and he's headed back to the Senate. He won big. I wasn't even close.
Yeah.
It was. It's going to end up being, 51-46-ish. Katie Hobbs, the lead is going to, her lead is going to narrow slightly. If you look at where the ballots are left by precinct, which we can do now, it favors Republicans heavily, but it's just not enough.
Just not enough
to pull it. Now, it could be that Kari Lake picks up enough votes to go push it into an automatic recount.
And how many votes is that?
About 15,000.
Yeah.
She's down 26 right now, 26,000 votes. So that's possible.
That's just amazing.
Abe is down 11,000 votes to Chris Mays. He is probably headed to recount.
And what about
Tom Horn? Will he's only down 592, so he's gonna take the lead and win.
And then what about our good friend Juan Ciscomani down in?
I think he's gonna
District
win.
6.
I mean, there's still some Pima ballots to count, and so it could get a little closer. But the last drop of Pima, he actually picked up 1,600 votes, so it's good. Schweikert's up by
that's why
why
we work so well together. I can go hunting and have absolutely. That's why I'm dressed like this and have a USC hat on because it's rivalry week. But I went hunting. I had no internet.
Yeah,
and I'm texting Sean like literally from a tent in the middle of the wilderness, saying, "What do you think? What do you know?" Because I can't pull anything up, here with my half a bar.
Yeah. So I think. I mean, the Republicans will hold the House by the narrowest.
Yeah.
I mean, it literally at this point, I think the best case for scenario for the Republicans in the House is 221, more likely to be 220, 219.
Yeah.
That's the razor's edge.
That is.
And
so what do you think happens in terms of leadership there? Because that's a big speculation.
They're supposed to have the vote tomorrow. And there's, Andy Biggs is calling, and a bunch of Freedom Caucus folks are calling for a delay in the vote because there's, outstanding,
there's outstanding
members. So we'll see.
Looked as early as last week that our good friend David Schweiker might lose.
Yeah.
So there's others just like that. And the Ciscomani election that if he wins, that'll be a pickup.
Yeah. So they're still waiting for some counting in California to get that figured out. So, but here in Arizona, things were not as expected, from us at least. Got to hand it to the Democrats. They did a very good job of driving their vote in early and then keeping that momentum. Even the late earlies have largely gone their way. And it's interesting because this is not a blue state. Some people might think it is. It's definitely purple. But you look, we went from a 5-4 Democrat delegation to a 6-3 Republican delegation.
But I think we said it in the closing remarks of our podcast last year, or last week, at least I did. It's, Arizona's not really a conservative state. It's not really a super liberal state. It's a contrarian state.
Yeah.
It's, we have a huge independent voting population here that can go either way. And I think the Trump factor went the other way. Yeah. And I texted you over the weekend with an observation I had. And we've been talking about this on the show for the last couple of weeks. Elections are won in the last 2 weeks. They really are, especially in states like this. And you don't need to pivot to your base in the last 2 weeks of the election.
Yeah.
And if the story is told of independents watching candidates and looking at candidates for the first time and saw Kari Lake standing on the stage with Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon, I think that was a turning point for a lot of independents.
No pun intended.
Yeah, it was. You want to talk about turning point? That was a turning point because regardless of what you think of them, regardless of how effective they've been in their various careers, if you're an independent, you're looking at, Charlie Kirk is this right-wing rabble-rouser, and you're looking at Steve Bannon, who just got indicted, in a federal court.
Yeah, I think
and
that
she's
was
up there, and they're up there with Kari Lake doing their thing. Versus a Kari Lake and all those candidates hanging out with law enforcement, hanging out with with first responders, hanging out with families and small business people. Those are the images you want to be out there in the last 2 weeks of an election.
Yep. Agreed. So how do we break this down? Oh, the other thing that we're talking about, the legislature, it's going to end up being 31-16 again. Redistricting was supposed to have this great impact on making Republicans have more seats. I was wrong. And there you go. So it's going to be narrow majorities there with a Democrat governor, with a Democrat Secretary of State, with maybe a Republican AG, Republican Treasurer, and probably a Republican Superintendent of Public Instruction. So Democrats took the top two in the state constitutional offices.
They can drive policy as much as they can.
Yeah.
And
so there'll be some gridlock. There's definitely going to be gridlock in Washington. Maybe that's not a bad thing.
But do you think, regardless of the politics involved and the way the races were run, do you think anybody got the message of what voters are frustrated about in terms of inflation?
Well, we'll have to wait and see, because it's clear that independents, as much as they were frustrated with the inflation, they punished candidates who looked backwards.
Yeah.
They were punishing candidates who looked, back to the 2020 election denial, claims of fraud, election stolen. And they were like, I'm tired of it.
Well, it's not people are aspirational, and you can keep looking towards the past, or you can look towards the future. And people want to invest in people who are looking towards the future.
Right.
How are you going to make my future better? Will my future and my children's future be better than it is today? If you keep looking back at something that happened 2 years ago, that was 2 years ago. 2 years ago, it was crazy. We had Antifa riots.
Every single independent voter knows there's nothing that's going to change that. Yeah. So what have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
And our guys didn't have much to
We did
offer.
not have an aspirational message.
Now, the thing that...
In fact, I would argue that Kevin McCarthy and his... What was it? It wasn't a contract. It was the commitment to America. It was one of the weakest things ever.
Nobody ever saw it.
Everybody saw it, and nobody ever read it.
Nobody saw it.
And nobody cared.
Nobody saw it. So a couple things, just breaking this down a little bit, as far as where things are in Arizona as we kind of look to the future. So this is not a red. This is not a red state. It's not a blue state. It's a purple state. Reason I say that is because the baseline Republican vote. All you have to do is look at Kimberly Yee, because she didn't run as a Trumpy. She didn't run as an election denier. She just ran a straight Republican message, and she is going to end up winning by more than 270,000 votes.
Well, she ran a message of competence.
Yeah.
When you run a message of competence and understanding, you're going to win. Look at Ron DeSantis down in Florida.
Yeah. So
Competence.
if you look, I mean, so in 2018, keep in mind that was a Democrat year as well. Governor Ducey was reelected with 57% of the vote, 1.3 million votes. And this year, Yee got 56% of the vote, 1.3 million votes. We have more votes now.
Sure.
But the interesting thing is, unlike what we had predicted before, turnout will actually end up being just over 2% less than it was in 2018.
Really?
And that made a difference.
Yeah.
So not only did you have...
Not
only do you have Republicans swinging against the election deniers, and clearly the independents swinging against election deniers, there were enough people, and I'm guessing if we once we break this down and get the total canvases, we can actually see what was the turnout with Democrats versus turnout with Republicans in comparison. My guess is that Republican turnout was less because they just didn't feel like there was no motivation. They didn't want to turn out for election deniers. So that 2% would have made a big difference in a number of these races, wouldn't have made a big difference in the Senate race. I think that, Masters was flawed in a variety of ways. I mean, to lose by 6, that's pretty rough. Or 5 at least.
Well, he was flawed from the beginning by very virtue of what Mark Kelly, and where is Mark Kelly anyway?
Well, he's in the Senate.
He's in the Senate for another 6 years for sure. But what he did a good job on the $100 million that he spent was hammering Blake Masters on things that he said during the campaign trail, during the primary, that you just don't you don't say.
Or things that he said earlier in his life.
Yeah, you just don't say.
So.
And you don't run on those things. And he made a lot of rookie mistakes. A lot of those candidates made a lot of rookie mistakes, both in the primary and the general, that's cost them. Mm-hmm. There really was no alliance person. Usually you see a coalescence of the chambers, of some of the more conservative groups like Free Enterprise Club and Goldwater. There's a coalescence around candidates and ideas and moving policy forward. There was none of that this election. And I think that kept people. And then the other point I brought up, you had Republican mayors and other Republican candidates openly saying, I'm not voting for these people.
Right.
I'm voting for the Democrat because I want these people to go away.
Yeah.
And that was probably a larger factor than we thought.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it was enough of a factor.
It was enough. Yeah.
These are small factors that add up.
Yeah.
So
it was
2.5% lower turnout. That's a factor.
That's a huge factor.
Election denying, obviously a factor. Trump, a factor. Not effectively communicating to the middle in the general, had no pivot from Lake, no pivot from Fincham. The only one that pivoted
they kept doing these rallies, with the base.
Yeah.
Well, the base is not going to leave you on this. You got to get them to turn out. Understood. But you really need to
and that's the thing, is that there
independence.
wasn't a party operation that was turning out voters the way that it probably should.
I wonder why.
Yeah.
Might have something to do with party leadership.
Yep.
And Kelly Ward.
You think?
You think?
So
that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah. Well, the party definitely needs to do some
The party has been broken now
The problem
for years.
is that it won't do introspection because it'll say, we just needed to double down. I mean, Trump's going to announce tomorrow, for all, from everything we understand. I think that DeSantis is well positioned to challenge him, and I think that he could actually have some impact. Especially if it pretty much stays as a one-on-one race. I mean, there's a poll out of Texas this morning that's got DeSantis up a bunch. over Trump.
It's still early. There's a lot of things that can happen between now and then, but the fact that Donald Trump is losing his entire noodle over Ron DeSantis, who just won an extraordinarily double-digit election, swept the state, is driving the Donald up the wall.
Yeah. Well,
Up the wall.
He's been attacking DeSantis. He's attacking Youngkin.
He's attacking Glenn Youngkin, Glenn Youngkin hasn't done anything.
Well, he's a threat.
He's a threat. Yeah.
Because people are talking about him running for president. So, yeah, I mean, I
and
hope
then
people.
You had Winsome Sears come out and say that she's not supporting Donald Trump.
Right. Right.
And almost goading him to attack her.
Oh.
Which would be a huge mistake. Already, these are mistakes.
All these are mistakes.
And turning people off, and turning a lot of people off who have tried to defend Trump and tried to stick up for the presidency. A lot of the good things that did happen, but then blew up on January 6th,
Right.
and has continued this downward spiral.
And I will say, we are
lunacy.
saying that these things are mistakes. They're mistakes because they're just not what a typical human should do. But they're but they are also potentially mistakes that are not going to be fatal to his election, unfortunately, because he has such a core. It's smaller than it used to be, but it's probably still big enough to get through a bruising primary. Maybe. I don't know. It's hard to say. But the guy defies all kinds of conventional wisdom when it comes to the base.
Yeah.
The fealty to him is just
It's bizarre.
disgusting.
It's the cult of personality.
It's disgusting. Because as conservatives, we're not supposed to have fealty to a person. We're supposed to have fealty to the principles.
Yeah.
And so these absolute Trump adorers who claim to be constitutionalists are not. I'll just say it. They're not.
No, it's always been for conservatives, principle over party. Good principles produce active and knowledgeable policy, which then creates a better future for our citizens, not people.
Yeah.
Not fealty to a person.
And the tone in politics. I mean, there's so many things. That
The other reason why DeSantis won like he did is that he enacted and pursued policy and promoted policy that is popular with voters.
Right.
And he did stand up to the woke mob. You didn't hear a lot about the woke mob here in Arizona, and it exists. You didn't hear a lot about it this election, and that could have made. Some messaging in that regard from the party and others could have made a difference.
Maybe. I think
maybe
the
not.
messaging.
But
the problem is that the messaging was they were so focused on election denying and
exactly.
It just
other than things that people were focused on in their everyday lives.
Nobody cares. Well, they care enough to vote against it. Let's put it that way.
They did. When they see crazy,
oh my
they move in the opposite direction.
So we will not be back for almost 2 weeks now. But by the time we get back, all the dust will be settled. We'll have a very narrow majority for the Republicans in the House. We're waiting to see whether the Senate, which the one thing I got right in the last podcast was the Senate was going to be either 50-50 or 51-49 one way or the other. It's going to be 50-50 or 51-49 Democrats' way. Waiting for Georgia, December 6th. So buckle up for that.
That can go any which way.
Very glad I don't live in Georgia right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, there might be a couple surprises. There's maybe a legislator or a Senate candidate that pulls it off. I mean, Nancy Bartow's down 2,200 votes. I guess it's could be possible that she could beat Christine Marsh. I don't know. Scantlebury in the East Valley, maybe. But we won't know that for a few more days because those will be close enough that you'll need to wait for the provisionals. What I said last week was, the provisionals will make the determination on Lake. That's not true now. But it could make the difference on the AG's race.
Well, here's some things that probably will not change. And that is the disapproval of the president over the next several years. Even today, after this election, RCP average has the president at 39% approve, 57% disapprove, and yet we still have these results. And so for the
Which
president,
tells you how screwed up.
yeah. So for the president to
Republican
continue
candidates
to
do
go out at the day after the election and say, "I'm not going to change course," that's a recipe for disaster. I don't think he makes it through. I mean, his whole term anyway.
Maybe not.
So it's going to be interesting to see what happens after that.
All I know is that there's going to be a bunch of fighting and gridlock in Washington. That's probably good for the country.
Great.
There's going to be a bunch of fighting and gridlock at the state capitol here because of a Democrat governor and Republican legislature. Probably not the worst thing. And then 2024, I mean, it starts, well, I guess we'll technically say it starts December 7th because that's the day after the Georgia runoff.
Yeah.
But it's probably going to, I mean, with Trump and others, it could start earlier.
Could start tomorrow.
Yeah.
Hopefully not, but it could. Which really puts Georgia in a tough spot.
Yeah. Well,
because you want Brian Kemp to campaign for Herschel. You want other people to be campaigning for Herschel. And if Trump is knee deep in it, they won't.
Yeah. And
they won't.
I mean,
They might shy away.
It doesn't matter.
We have the House. We can put a check on the Senate. We're done.
Yep. Well, we'll see how motivated people are because if Laxalt had pulled it off in Nevada and this was 50-50 or 49,
yeah, what happened
50,
there? Goodness.
Determining whether it was going to be a 50-50 or a Republican majority, this race would be a lot more intense. But this runoff now, whether it's Democrats at 51 or Democrats at 50, less of an issue because with Kamala they have 51. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how much people care about making this a big push. I'm waiting to see. I mean, I'm sure that some will, but I don't know.
Well, with all with all the focus on McConnell now in the Senate and him being elected as leader or not elected as leader, or postponing the vote.
Yeah,
which some leading Republicans have called for.
Right. The leadership,
the leadership,
the inter-party fights on both the right and the left are going to be fascinating to watch. On the Democrat side, you're going to have the left, hard left, saying, "Oh, look, we kept the House, or we didn't lose the House as bad as we thought we would. We kept the Senate, but they had some big losses. The progressives had some big losses. I mean, Wisconsin was probably the biggest. And so it will be very interesting to see the policy fights within the Republican conference and within the Democrat caucus on both the House and the Senate. And it's just, who knows what happens.
On the left, as long as Sandy Cortez is there, it's always going to be fun.
Yeah. AOC.
All
right.
Former bartender.
Well, we'll give you guys a break for 10 days, and then we'll be back.
Then we'll be back.
Assess everything. Maybe we'll have some of these smart people on to talk about what they saw that we didn't.
We should have Kimberly Yee on. I think she would be fascinating.
Yeah.
And some other folks on. But we are entering the holiday season. We had Veterans Day this last Friday, so we want to give a big salute to all of our veterans.
Oh, we have Thanksgiving coming up.
And we have Thanksgiving coming up, and we are thankful for this podcast. We're thankful for our listenership. We're thankful for Dave Pratt and Star Worldwide Networks.
Yep.
I'm thankful for you, Sean.
And I'm thankful for you, Chris.
And we're thankful, after all the dust settles, we're thankful to live in a country that at its core is based on faith, freedom, and free enterprise.
That's right.
Nothing will change that.
Nothing will change. Thanks, guys.
So
have a good one.
God bless.
See ya.